Hi. You too. It's great to be back. Hey, Lori. Oh. Oh, sure. Yeah. How you doing? Good work. Guess I gotta start leaving an hour. Yeah, we did too.
Which one?
Election stuff.
Oh. All right, we ready? It is 5 o'clock, so I will go ahead and start the meeting. It is July 31st, 2023, and this is our budget workshop. Lori, can I have roll call?
Mayor Young,
Here.
Vice Mayor Brandon. She is on Zoom. Councilmember D'Ambra,
Here.
Councilmember Painter,
Here.
Councilmember Sartori.
Here.
All right, Jeremy, the floor is yours.
All right, some of this might be a little bit of a repeat from the last budget workshop. As you guys know, that was a very, very preliminary high-level look at the budget. I think we've made some changes since the last workshop per council direction, and also some things that we had updated from a staff standpoint. These are just some of the dates, depending on how tonight goes. We could have another budget workshop if needed. But we do have the budget hearing for September 14th and the final budget hearing September 21st. First slide is just kind of a historical look at our millage rate. We don't have any planned millage rate increase. The overall increase is 15.17. Estimate 41% of this is due to new construction. Homestead properties limited to 3% or CPI. More than 90% of the village residential units have a homestead protection. Non-homestead properties limited to 10% increase, as well as commercial property. So just some changes since the first workshop. We have increased the assessed value $18,794. That we did change the max, the millage rate to the rate that was set at the council meeting. And then we did charge for code compliance, Jupiter and that colony, a 4% increase, which is $800 for that contract the next year. Some of the expenditures that we've looked at since the last workshop, we did have to increase Northcom contract for dispatch services. Lobbying services, I have met with several lobbying firms that per, I guess, previous conversation, and so we kind of got a better idea of what that cost would look like, and so we've had to adjust those fees. The salary and benefits, we did recognize, some of the benefits that we did not have included in the budget. And then final bid negotiation for health insurance, we saw a reduction of $44,000. And then, so we took those differences and we allocated to fund balance, so we'd have a balanced budget. Increase in water fund revenues of $447,000. So we took the appropriated the fund balance to cover these expenses that are listed here. Water, we got some updated costs since the last meeting with the water treatment plant upgrades, energy efficiencies, $300,000. We've increased the pump and motor rehabilitation, $75,000. Salaries and benefits for a new office manager. As you guys may recall, currently we split an office manager between public works and water utilities. The proposed budget, we have that person is going to be retiring probably the first of the year. And once we do that, we're going to have a part-time public works assistant, but then we'll have a full-time water administrative assistant for Marjorie. And so that's what those costs are in the water fund. Some other increase in contractual service for the SCADA support. As you guys know, we're updating our SCADA, so increasing those, and then GIS mapping and doing some work with some of the new requirements that the government has came out with. And then final bid negotiations for health insurance, there's a decrease, and then some additional changes, minor changes within the water utility fund.
Jeremy, sorry, can you repeat the plant upgrades and the pump rehab? Why did those change? Or what was the change there from last
The
time?
increase, just the changes, and we got some additional cost in since the last budget workshop. And then stormwater, we've increased the stormwater fund revenues, 28,000 to appropriate fund balance, just to cover the expenses for the Dover ditch improvements, and then decrease allocate to fund balance 128,000. We were planning on allocating that 128,000 to fund balance, but we didn't have all of Dover ditch costs, so we're decreasing that allotment to the allocate to fund balance. And then we have obviously the health insurance reduction for the stormwater fund, and then the increased capital improvement fund revenues. We had $250,000 set aside in our capital improvement plan for Tequesta Park and matching, but it was actually 2 years away. My fault. Looking at the legislative process, that'll be over in March, and so if we do have a match that's coming, if we are able to get those funds from the state, the match will come earlier than what I guess projected. So we moved those into this year's capital improvement fund, so that's where you see the increase in improvement for the fund expenditures and the appropriated fund balance of $250,000. If we don't get it, we don't use it. We don't have any plans to use it other than trying to match what the state, if we can get something from the state. Just a summary of all funds. Proposed budget for the 23-24 total year represents $3,811,181 increase over last year, mainly due to capital expenditures and infrastructure improvements. The general fund increased 9.5% overall due mainly to capital projects. We did transfer capital funds, $1.25 million, and then the additional firefighter. These are just a breakdown of where our expenditures go. Salary and wages, you'll see, is roughly 61%. And then revenues, mostly we receive a majority of our funds from property taxes. Of course, you have other taxes, franchise fees, miscellaneous. The general fund, this is our projected general fund unassigned fund balance. As you guys know, we've been tracking this pretty significantly for the last couple of years to try to bring us back in track. 2022, we decided we were going to try to really shoot for that 3-month target. You guys, the council has authorized that policy change just recently, so this kind of shows in the last 2 years of this where we will be or where we project to be. If we do, we typically haven't budgeted for the large projects like the 300 building. If we are able to, get some of those funds that will from the land development fees, that should change this trajectory a little bit as well. Building fund, we do plan on utilizing some of the expenditures for a couple of capital projects with the generator and a vehicle. I know that just recently there was some talks about the AC that feeds the building fund, so we're working on trying to get a quote for that. So this may change slightly when you guys see it in the next version to try to recognize those costs for the AC from the building fund. So this just shows our target for the building fund is 50%, 6 months expenditures, and so this shows where we're projected to be at the end of 23, and that's not counting any large projects like the 300 building or even if 250 came in between now and then. Some of our other funds, capital improvement fund, you guys have this in your packet, but this is kind of the breakdown of what our planned expenditures are for the 23-24 year, and I guess all 5 years together. We can go through those individually if you guys want. I think we gave you guys a folder with all the projects and some of the backup information. And so you got the water fund and the stormwater fund as well. This is the overview of the 301 fund. So with our projected expenditures now with Tequesta Park, the 25% matching, pathway sidewalks, the skate park, tasers, 2 cardiac monitors, old Dixie landscaping project, and then that'll be the planning for that. Sidewalk grinding, and then the ball field equipment, rake, We will use $282,000 of the reserves out of that fund. So we're projected at the end of '24 to have a balance of $512,000 in that fund. I did show this in a slide of where we're projecting. We believe that this will sunset in the final quarter of 2025. As you guys know, we receive roughly $500,000, a little bit more from our local infrastructure tax that is planned to sunset at the end of '25. So, in the next near future, we need to look at a revenue source to try to help supplement some of those capital projects. We'll be left with just the infrastructure, the utility tax from the water, which is roughly around $300,000. You can see those projections as we move forward. So, 25, 26, you'll start to see that fund going lower. There are projects that come up from time to time that kind of pop in here, based on, the need. We try to project these out 5 years, the expenditures, but, so it is concerning a little bit that, if something else does come up, to be able to have some funds for that as a sustainable funding source for the 301. These are the capital projects 303 fund, so this is funded mostly from ad valorem taxes. So you see our 5-year capital road, we've moved $710,000. The first phase, Remembrance Park, $600,000. 200 of that is from a matching grant, and then we commit half of the contract amount for fire service Palm Beach County for future vehicle replacement. So this would be the second year of this, making 249, we'll say $250,000 available for a future purchase. And when we start looking at leaning forward to the next year, we do have to start talking about a new rescue vehicle. The Water Utility Fund, you'll see our net position as the end of '23 projected. As we go into '24, we are projecting to use $215,000 of our reserves, or our balance there, to cover the operating and capital expenditures. That is with the rate increase in there and the $10 monthly capital charge. Just some of the highlights: so the water treatment plant upgrades, energy resource improvements, $6,365,000. Water treatment plant train replacement, $320,000. So you see those are highlighted over there. I won't read all of them. And then the refuse and recycling, we've talked about this a little bit. We did not take an admin fee out of the refuse and recycling to try to hold the fees as much as we could for our residents. But there is an increase of 3.5% per agreement that we have with Waste Management. So we'll continue to see increases of those, but the money that we receive isn't covering the estimated expenditures that we have for this account. So in the future, we'll have to next year we'll look at this to make sure that we're capturing all of our costs. Stormwater Fund, net position at the end of '23. You'll see this actually grows a little bit if everything stays the course. As you guys know, the last couple of years we've had some emergency expenditures in the Stormwater Fund, bringing that balance pretty low. So you'll see this actually grows a little bit in '24 if everything stays on track, and some of the ARPA funds that we use help with this fund quite a bit with some of the projects that we've done. Just a couple of budget decision points, and I think I've spoken with all of council about this. Our millage rate up to 5.915 needs a simple majority vote. 6.29, which is the recommended budget that we have, is 2/3 vote of the government body, roughly 4 to 1. The millage rate up to 6.5 still takes 2/3 vote. And then if we keep the millage rate, what we set at the max tax rate, would take a unanimous vote of the governing body. Just consideration. So last year, I know Mayor Young asked me to put together some slides last year. The same thing, I think, through council asked for a very similar thing. And so these were some of the considerations that I guess would be considered if we were looking to fund either, I guess, Remembrance Park or other projects. And so these are just some of the considerations. You know, staff has these in the recommended budget. We hope that, you know, we can do some of these things, especially like Tequesta Park and Constitution Park. You know, there are some upgrades that are needed and some maintenance. Other consideration is Remembrance Park. And I put this slide up there because just for the sake of confusion or to help mitigate that, but there are 3 phases of Remembrance Park. This kind of shows that what we're talking about is phase 1. In the recommended budget, we have $600,000 to go toward phase 1. We did get an estimate from our consultant that in order to get 700, we'd probably need 700,000 to get this scope of work that I've provided, and I think I've shared this with council in the past prior to this too. You know, the concerning part of this, you know, just after we went through DRC, was that the landscape buffer was not included, and that was a big thing for the surrounding property. So I have talked to the consultant about this. If we wanted to look at that, he would have to take a real deep, hard look at what else we can cut out of here and still try to get something significant out of this park for 700,000. He did say to do it in 2 phases, remobilize, and some of the overlap in projects that they'd have to do twice. We're looking at an increased cost of about $200,000 if we do it in the 2 phases. I can't take credit for this, but I will reference that Mr. Sartori did suggest at one point looking at maybe we hold off on the phased approach, hold the money, collect the money, hold on to it till the future year and do it all at one to try to save. So that's something for consideration. The grant does not have to be spent until 2026, so we have time. We will not lose that grant. That's something to consider as well. Then these were the other considerations come up over time, over the year. I know the EV charging station has been, we've been asked about it, you know, I'd say several times throughout the year. The EAC has discussed this as well. We looked at another company to provide this service. It still doesn't warrant them coming in and putting it in and doing the shared revenue. So we looked at what it would cost just to buy the unit outright, and then we collect the revenue. It came out to $21,000. The return on investment of this for this $21,000, based on what the company has said, is about 7 years to return on investment on that. And so, you know, is it worth it to us to spend $21,000 for 7 years when that technology, you know, could be obsolete in, you know, 2 or 3 years, and there's a new technology? So do we want to spend, you know, $21,000 to put an EV charging station at the rec center? And then parking study, I know Mayor Young has, we've talked about this before, and I think this came up at the last budget workshop about looking at a different scope of that instead of the Cadillac version, looking at a different scope. I did talk to the consultant on this. Previously we had a peak and off-peak time where they would go out there and look at these sites. We've removed the off-peak time, so in theory, if you go out there during peak time, that's going to be the highest use. So we removed that. That saved several $1,000s. We've also, it had 2 sites for R3 zoning and then 1 site for the other 2 zonings. What we've done is we've eliminated the 2 sites for R3 and just 1 site for each of the zoning districts. And so that brought the cost down significantly, down to $16,580. So if you guys want to consider that, that'll be something we'll have to, you know, look at that. And then since we put together the presentation, our property casualty and workman's comp insurance that we budgeted for 18.5%, we have got that initial number back. It is not final yet, but we are looking at an additional $97,000 than what we budgeted. We did allocate $150 plus some change to cover that cost, so we feel like we're in good shape there with the allocate to fund balance. Like I said, this is still preliminary. It's not a final number. You guys will have to accept that final number from the property and casualty insurance, but we know that we can cover it with the recommended budget that we have in front of you guys. This was just a slide that was put together. There was requests we put together for, you know, what the estimated average cost to the to the homeowners, Village of Tequesta with the tax rate the way it is, solid waste increases, stormwater increase, water utility rate increase, and then the capital improvement charge. Total impact to the residents, $277. This does not include, any other taxing authorities. The MTSU was obviously that's the non-resident, but some of the other taxing authorities like the Inlet District or the school district, this would not, and even the county is represented on here, but this doesn't, we don't speak for them, but this was just an estimate that was put together. And so you'll see the total impact annually for an average home of $566,000 for 24 would be $243. And then this is what it looked like if we did reduce the tax. We had a tax reduction of 6.290, which was the recommended budget. So with that, spoke really fast. If you guys want to, if there's additional things you want to talk about, any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I'm going to invite Jeff up because he can help answer questions. Jeff has done a lion's share of the work for it, and I really appreciate what Jeff and his team have done. Obviously, the directors have done a masterful job as well of helping me put together a budget for your guys' consideration.
Jeff, do you have anything to add before we open the floor for discussion?
No, I think Mr. Allen covered it well.
Okay, all right, council?
Yeah, okay. And to Jeremy and to your team again as well. I mean, amazing job pulling this stuff together. I know it's changing every day, so Jeff, thank you for what you do. I'll just kind of throw out the things that I'd like to see us get accomplished with this budget. We talked about Tequesta Fest last time, and I'm of the opinion we need to have it. I like the scaled back version of it for about $70,000. But really just keeping it to one day for residents only, because I think for the limited amount of revenue that it did generate through, non-resident sales, I have some other things that I want to see if we can work towards. So I'm in favor of a scaled back version of Tequesta Fest, one day only for Tequesta residents. When we did our strategic planning, the number one item was revisit plan to move to 8-man shifts for fire services. Behind that, tied for third, were two items: pursue state of Florida funding for Tequesta Park, and the second was development of Remembrance Park. I would like to see us address the priority of going to 8-man shifts. I would like to see us add 8 men, the 8-man, and I speak only in man. I know we have women firefighters as well, but 8-man shifts for the remaining 2 shifts. I would like to fund both of those positions this year. It's our council's number one priority. 80% of our resident surveys that came back ranked their interaction with fire as satisfied or very satisfied. 37, almost 38% of the resident surveys said over the next 2 years, police, fire, and ambulance services should be the priority of the services we need to focus on. About 95% of our residents voted the charter amendments to require, a vote of our residents if we ever tried to take, if our police and fire were ever to go to the county. So it shows that the residents think it's a priority to support our fire. We named fire our number one thing. Adding the 8th man to the remaining both shifts reduces overtime. I'll guess that it will help pay for one of those positions. I don't know the exact dollar amount. Provides additional coverage for workers' comp and FMLA absences. Adding the 8th person covers unplanned leave, again, which reduces overtime, reduces the workload of our existing staff. Adding the 8th man, 8th person would allow for a minimum of 6 personnel to be scheduled 93% of the time. And 7 people on shift 40% of the time. 6 personnel means 3 on a rescue and 3 on the truck 93% of the time. I mean, our residents love our police and fire. We said our number one priority was to get to the 8-man shifts. I would ask the chief and staff to see how we could do that. Maybe we phase those positions in, don't bring them all in at the same time, maybe one in October, one in April. So I would like to see that in anything that we do moving forward. again, tied for number 3 on our priorities would be Remembrance Park. I like what we have in here today to about the 600,000 plus the an additional 100 from the Capital Improvement Fund. I would like to start this project in Remembrance Park next year and toward the end, about this time. So we're not kicking the can down the road for a year. Do the scaled back version for $700,000. Start it around this time of the year where we're looking and we know what our revenues for potential taxable values are for the following year, and look at another similar $600,000 to $700,000 to complete the entire project. But to start on Remembrance Park at a reduced phasing, or what the improvements would be, because I think we need to put our money where our mouth is, and we spent a half a day talking about what our priorities are, and I want to see us put in Remembrance Park for $700,000 toward the end of the fiscal year, so we can still start it during 23, 24, and then continue with that with the 24, 25. I've stated my position on the fire, and Tequesta Fest being one day. So those are my big issues. So.
Frank, you want to jump ahead of me? I'm still processing my thoughts.
Okay. Well, I've been an advocate for the full 8-man shifts for a while. There's no substitute, I don't believe. Well, I'm sorry. So I've been an advocate for fully funding the 8-man shifts for a while. There's just no substitute for having 3 people on that rescue truck, and then 3 people obviously just take care of the engine or a second rescue if need be. So I completely agree with you on that and fully support the idea of going to the 8-man shift. I wouldn't even wait. I would do it as quickly as possible, simply because it could mean the difference between life and death for somebody. Tequesta Fest, I'm gonna disagree with you a little bit. I'd like to see that eliminated for a year. It's a significant cost, and we have other infrastructure projects that really do need to be addressed. I'm with you on Remembrance Park, but I really think we should be fully funding that park, which is one of the reasons I'm not in favor of reducing taxes at this time. I mean, I am a big supporter of reducing taxes when we can put forth a sustainable reduction in taxes, where when we look out into the future and we do our planning, it's clear that a tax reduction and the revenue loss that will occur with it is sustainable, and we don't have to come back to the taxpayers 2 or 3 years down the road and say, oops, sorry, we misjudged, and now we've got to bump taxes back up again. So I would like to keep the millage rate where it is and fully fund Remembrance Park and get that done. I think the idea of phasing, my concerns there are too, there are setup costs that get repeated, so you've got added costs that occur. You also have disruption to the areas around the park. So do we want to, engage in having to set up twice? Do we want to engage in disrupting those areas twice? I think it'd be much more economically efficient to just move forward with that park and get the park done. And again, on the taxes, again, I'm not in favor of reducing taxes at this point. I think we've got, as Jeremy's outlined, a number of initiatives and projects that we can address with that additional revenue, and I think it's in our best interest and our residents' best interest to do so. If you look at the savings in taxes, again, I'm going to argue that it's de minimis. I mean, I'm semi-retired. I'm on a fixed income, so to speak, and $15, $20 a month is not too much to bear in return for, I think, all the good that will come about for the implementation and completion of these projects. That's just where I kind of stand on it at this point.
So are you suggesting taking those funds and putting them towards Remembrance Park now?
Yeah, I'm saying we should use the Tequesta Fest funds and the additional funds that we would realize by maintaining the millage rate where it is to get that 8-man shift fully funded and get Remembrance Park completed. And if we've got some additional funds to make sure that some of these other projects that Jeremy has outlined are fulfilled, I think that's a better use of the best use for those monies at this point, rather than providing what is a very, very small tax reduction.
Question, so when we say fully funding the 8-man shifts, is that one
in one new position in 23?
No.
Or 2 new positions in
Two.
23
Two is
as
ju-
opposed to?
Yeah, 2, just as Rick advocated.
Okay.
So all 3 shifts are 8-minute,
Okay.
8-person shifts.
Okay. So Molly, if it's okay with you, we'll go
absolutely.
backwards. All right, so just kind of going down the list here, and I'll start with the big one, the tax rate. And I know we've all thought about this a lot. I tend to agree with Frank. I mean, I think there's just so much uncertainty in the national, international economy, and in a time like now, you know, keeping your powder dry and having enough in reserves, whether we need it now or we don't know if we need it now, I think it's important. And I do, while there's an increase, and I certainly understand that that increase is different for everyone, I think it's worth it. If we were going up, that's a whole different story. We're keeping it right where it is. I think that is the smart decision under the circumstances. As much as I would like to see, you know, our taxes go down, I'm sure, and I know Jeremy and the rest of the staff and everyone involved before, you know, we joined council has done a tremendous amount of hard work to get it to the point where it is now, where we can even consider reducing it. I just feel like with everything that's going on right now, it would be in our best interest to just keep it where it is, to the extent we can. To Cuesta Fest, reading over Jeremy's notes from last week, and with the one-day option, I think it's a great idea. I obviously have some concerns over what one day, even if it's residential only, looks like at Constitution Park, and that's, you know, we can't have it all, right? So I think there's a lot of people that would like to see it residents only regardless. It might be a little chaotic, but at least it gets us within some kind of reasonable budgeted amount. And then the, you know, funds that we would have used otherwise, which I believe was, what was the previous total? We were talking about 70,000 versus maybe 120. And I know we're still waiting on a second price for a 2-day option, right?
Yep.
But conceivably, I mean, it's not gonna be quite double, but it's gonna be, you know,
More.
probably a lot closer to where we would have been had we kept it as is. I like the idea of keeping it at one day. To Councilmember Sartori's point, Tequesta, you know, festivals and family gatherings in Tequesta are what this community is all about, and you hate to take something like that away from the community. While I also do agree with Councilmember what Frank said about, you know, that this, if there was a year to potentially hold back, maybe it's this year, but I think it is important enough that if we can get it down to one day at Constitution Park and make it work, I think $70,000 is worth budgeting. Fully funding the 8-man shifts, I agree. I mean, the safety of our residents is obviously crucial. Even more so, and I don't know, I'm not fully clear on this, but my understanding is that, you know, with some of these agreements we have out of Tequesta, that certain municipalities, you know, will require that we have 8-man shifts, or we're not actually complying with their procedures. And I could be way off on that, by the way, but that's what I was told. But going back just to the safety of our residents, I think it's important to have, you know, the 3 in truck, 3 in the, it just makes sense to me, if we can obviously swing it. And then Remembrance Park, Frank, you took the words out of my mouth. I mean, I'm in construction. There is a real cost with mobilizing and demobilizing. And it's not gonna be clear when you're looking at a budget, but there is a significant cost with doing that. So to the extent we can, by maybe pulling back on certain other costs to Cuesta Fest, keeping the tax rate where it is, to the extent we can do that all in one shot, I think that is the way to go. That's really all I got. That's it.
Okay, Vice Mayor, you still with us?
Of course I am.
Okay.
Okay, I have a question for Councilmember Sartori. When you say not starting Remembrance Park until next year, say like in April, are you still thinking we should have it in this budget? Is that what you're thinking? So that way next year, that budget money starts it, and then we fall into the next budget and finish it. Is that correct?
No, my position is that we have a $600,000, we have $400,000 from the general, we have a $200,000 FERDAP grant, and we talked about taking $100,000 from the CIP for a total of $700,000. I would support keeping that in starting this very late in the fiscal year, so we can just do all the mobilization at one time. And if the balance to fund this thing is another $600,000, we put that in the following year's budget. I know there's going to be some price escalation, but I wouldn't want to mobilize twice. If we could mobilize all in June, July, August, then so we just don't start. It sits as it's going to be a passive park. It's going to sit with the grass that's on it now. But my position would be that we would start this later in the fiscal year, next year.
Okay. Because I'm sitting right now thinking I would rather prefer to see that park done in 2 phases. I'm fine with, but not if the 2 phases are going to actually cost us more money to start the second phase of part 1. So I would be in favor if we could push it a little bit and try to do the whole park together all at once and not lose money by restarting over or moving things around, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think, and I understood what Rick was suggesting, and my only concern with that is then, because I you know, the logic is you fund it in this year's budget, you fund it in the successive year's budget, and then you just run the project all the way through. The only drawback is that the second part of that is getting completed in October, November, December, and you're now into season, and it would be, you know, it could be disruptive, whereas if you do it, let's say you start in whatever we started, you know, if we started next, you know, March, April, whatever, if we could try and do it out of season and just take it all the way through, I think there's a benefit to that.
I hear what you're saying. I'm in favor of trying to knock it out all at once, however we do that. I mean, when we talk about seasons too, after we went through COVID, we don't have as much of a strong difference of a season. We have a lot of seasonal people staying longer and coming and going on different schedules. So for me, it's hard to really gauge our season, just like when we start projects in summer because it's so hot, but then everyone's home and at a school, there isn't really a magical time. But I would be in favor of doing it the less disruptive, the better. Fire, I think it's great if we can find a way to get all those 8-man shifts accomplished. If we can do it in the budget, I'd be in favor of it. If we need to wait a year to make it work, I'd rather do that. What was the other thing? Remembrance Park, we just talked about.
Tequesta Fest.
Tequesta Fest. I did ask Greg to look at just what would be the option cost-wise to break it into 2 days. I wasn't pushing for 2 days. I just wanted to see what that would look like. And now that we know what it kind of would look like, I would push for more of 1 day, and it'd probably be residents only since our area has changed over and we have a lot more active residents that attend things more often, not like it was 15, 20 years ago. So we might have to do that. Even 70 grand's a little high for me, but I do think that if you start taking those events away, you're gonna become a stale community. Even when I'm over here, the thing that makes this magical is the community togetherness and getting together and doing things. I think we should keep it as much as we can and not scrap that. Tax rate, I still sit 50-50. I see where all your points are coming from. There's so much we're adding on between the water and the school district's probably gonna go up. I'd be open to going down to the 6.29 as long as we can make everything work. If we can't make it all work in our budget, I'd say stick it to where it is currently, and let's make sure that our residents get everything they need, including fire and police at number 1. Those are my thoughts for now.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Secretary, I don't think you commented on the millage rate. Do you want
What we set, the maximum rate, what we set last meeting, sorry.
So what would you want to do with those funds?
I would make sure that we get the second shift for both, that there's about 100,000 for that. And then if we can fully mobilize Remembrance Park all at one time. And these little things, I'm saying these line items that Jeremy shared this evening, I'm indifferent on the charging station. I think the technology is going to change, but some of the things, a parking study, I think we need that parking study, and more improvements to Tequesta Park. Fund all those things if we can with that extra 600,000, and that's what we're talking about, approximately, right? 600,000. Taking an additional 100 from the CIP, so if we can fully fund what we need to do to get Remembrance Park done, the second shift, both 8-person shifts is what I would use with those dollars for.
Okay. So I'll start. The one thing I do feel like should be up for consideration to add that it's not in the budget is the parking study. I just think that could bite us in the butt down the road as properties continue to redevelop the vacant land we still have develops. I don't want to cause a parking problem in the future. I know on Beach Road, I frequent Coral Cove and the Intercoastal, and just with Sea Glass, there's always people parking, and I know it's not Tequesta parking, but we're still causing it, and when we have other future buildings developing, where are they gonna park? Because they're parking in Coral Cove Park all the time, they're parking across the street, I see worker trucks over there, because there's nowhere else for them to park on the properties. If Paradise Park, if that ever gets developed, and we could really be in a bind with parking. So I think that's important, and unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but I think that is a study that, Keith, you said might, to make a change in the ordinance be defensible, that is something we should have a study on. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, when we originally visited changing the parking code last fall, my recollection is that the council asked, well, where did these numbers come from? And it was sort of, well, we looked at other municipalities and just kind of picked and chose it. So there was, if somebody was to challenge us, we had no facts to support how we got to where we got. So you always want to have findings of fact. And why did you pick that number? Because our parking professional looked at our village and analyzed the situation and told us that this is where we are and this would be the appropriate thing to do. So then, then you have an expert to lean on who can support what the final decision is.
I know sometimes we all think we spend so much money on consultants and all these studies, but sometimes they are necessary, unfortunately, to get
I think the
to
parking is
where we want to go.
is a necessary one. I do.
And just so I'm clear, we're talking about the 16,580?
Yeah, and I
Okay.
think originally it came to us like 60,000, or I mean, it was really high.
Upwards of 70.
And it wasn't budgeted for. If it came to us at 16,000, I almost feel like we probably could have found the money to
Yeah.
address that this year. So that, it's small potatoes in the overall scheme of things, but I think it's important.
I agree.
And then to touch on some of the other topics discussed, so DeQuesta Fest, I think I'm in favor of doing the scale down one day for the 70,000 plus or minus. I think that's a good kind of compromise to save a little money there, and especially because it's at Constitution Park now, not where it's previously been held. On the adding this would be the third and final 8th man shift, right?
Yes.
I'm a little torn about that, and I think obviously public safety is one of the most important services we provide, and I think that staff and council have done a great job providing them with all the tools, equipment, staff that we've needed. Like, I think we're on top of it. We make sure they have everything they need, and I know that this is a goal. Staff's plan was to we were going to add the 8th next year, right? So Chief, you're here. We have county on this side of the bridge during the bridge closure. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So part of me is, because we do have county on this side of the bridge, staff's recommendation to wait till next year makes sense to me right now. If we didn't have county on this side of the bridge, I would probably 100% be in favor of adding it this year too. But knowing we have, and they're pretty much at our disposal, more or less, right? So that's kind of my deciding factor there. So I don't think I am in favor of adding that second and final 8th man shift now. Remembrance Park, I want to get that fully done, the first phase. I do know that I'm in construction as well, and I do know there are costs for remob. I do know lots of times when you're dealing with a consultant estimate and when you get a contractor engaged, pricing can come in above, it can come in underneath. And then also when you have a contractor engaged, we can tell them, hey, we need to find like $100,000, like please help us with value engineers project, and they might be able to help us see some things that we don't see now, that the consultants don't see, to get a good portion that's done, and that will make the remob cost not as, I think maybe you're really just paying for remob and you're not ripping anything up down the road. So I do keep that in mind too, thinking it wouldn't possibly be so bad if we proceeded with a phase of the first phase, and get someone engaged, start working with them to try to find solutions where we could really achieve a substantial impact there and reduce impact to have to come back and finish it down the road. But I will say, like, looking at some of this list, and granted, two of the things in my calculations are from the CIP, so as we know, that's kind of just moving money around a little bit, but I came up with $254,000 that we could add to Remembrance Park this year, and with the millage rate, the staff recommended millage rate. So I think that's, you know, we might be able to add more money towards Remembrance Park, get someone engaged, and figure out how to do a really good phase and get that going. Because when do you think, Jeremy, you would actually break ground on that? Like, if you got the green light and we do the whole bidding process and everything, you're still, I mean, it's not like you're starting this at the start of the fiscal year, correct?
Right. I mean, you'd probably be looking at maybe January, February, you know, depending on, you know, the process.
All right, did I have any other notes? What else were we talking about?
The 254,000, is there specific things there that?
Yes, so the two CIP, Mr. Bradford, plug your ears, is the tree canopy, the 75,000 from there, and the old Dixie beautification funds. And you could still do those, like I said, it's kind of moving that money around, and then we'd have less money that fifth year, you know, that projection that Jeremy had. The others that I think we could do is the balance of the Tequesta Park funds, the dog park, the budget software, and the Cypress property. And that kind of goes my comment, like, I'm not saying that those are important, but I feel like sometimes maybe we spread the wealth too much, and if we focus more on one, then maybe those things we could tackle next year. So again, that, yeah, that was $254,000.
But Molly, you're still not completing the Remembrance Park structure,
Correct.
parcel. And again, when you look at, for example, you look at Tequesta Park and the dog park, if you added all those things up, including the Constitution Park elements, you're talking about $90,000. Again, hence my argument, let's skip Tequesta Fest for a year, because I'd rather take the money and put it into real improvements that people can enjoy and will see each and every day that they're in this community. And again, moving money from one pot to another to say, okay, well, we're going to defer all these things in favor of doing something else, but we're not even going to complete the something else, to me, just, I'm sorry, it just doesn't make logical sense. I think we have the funding, if we maintain the millage rate where it's at, to be able to accomplish most of the things that are on this list, get them done. Residents will see the improvements, they'll see the enhancements, they'll be able to enjoy those things. And, you know, and again, next year, like I said, if we get, you know, 300 building comes online or some of these other things happen, I think we will be in a position a year or two out where we can provide the residents with probably some meaningful tax reduction that is sustainable. So I'd rather just look at what we have to, what we know, where we know there are opportunities to achieve things that are meaningful benefits to the residents, and get those things done, and then, you know, move on from there. The idea of moving money back and forth and piecemealing it and deferring this to the following year, I just don't see a reason to do those things, again, especially in light of the fact that the amount of the tax reduction that you're providing, again, is so small relative on an individual basis.
I think that's extremely insensitive to say that. I think that's not small when you add it up to people's insurance, all the other services they pay for, their electrical bill.
I understand
It's not insignificant. I think any part that we can have in helping the residents is extremely important.
I think reducing taxes, as Patrick said, I think is a key initiative that we want to undertake. But you're talking about a $20 difference on a monthly basis in somebody's tax bill. I'm sorry, that is not significant. And again, when you look at what you're going to get in return for it, Remembrance Park, all these other improvements, there's so much value added to the community that you're getting for a relatively small amount of money. I just don't see the rationale for not achieving and accomplishing the things that are before us right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the
And
very.
can I ask a question?
Yep.
Jeremy, for our millage rate, are our only two options are the 6.29 or the current one, 6.629, or could we go somewhere in the middle of that?
You can go somewhere in the middle.
The vote
So
will
if
just
we
change.
add all the 8-man shifts, if we bumped it up from 6.29, somewhere in the middle, to cover the remaining 8-man shifts and whatever else is kind of being discussed, to kind of find a compromise in the middle, that is possible.
Yeah, and then wherever you land will depend on what votes you need. So yes, you can come anywhere up to 6.629. So it's not,
So you guys
it's
could do
not.
like 6.4, it should be in the middle, I think.
Yeah, I mean, depending on what you guys want in and out, we can go back and run budget numbers and then come up with the estimated millage rate that it would take to fund those operations.
Okay, and maybe that's a way to start going in the direction of lowering taxes, even though it's a minuscule amount per household, but it's going in the right direction, but we're still getting things done that residents will enjoy.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, to finish up my point is, I think, I am extremely confident in staff's recommendation. I'm confident in their 5-year projections with our general fund. I'm confident with their 5-year projections with our CIP. I've studied this stuff a lot. And, and we talk about the residents all the time too. As we know, the businesses and commercial properties, they're capped at 10%, not 3%. And so that's a big impact to them as well. That trickles down to the business owners. And at some point, the business owners, they can't keep increasing their, services, the cost of their services, because the consumer is going to stop buying. So I think we have to think about the businesses as well and the impact that this has on them if we keep raising taxes, and especially during the bridge closure. And really, I mean, I just don't know how we justify to residents that we didn't lower the millage rate when staff recommended it to us.
I guess where I land on this, and I'm sort of echoing what Frank said, but just the more we talk about this, is it's just hard to even understand why we would lower taxes when we're talking about piecemealing very important projects, and at a time like, so we're simultaneously talking about cutting certain projects and trying to figure out what we can do and what we can't do, all of which are very important, and I think most of the community wants. I mean, I think that's pretty, and I'm not at all taking away from how great it would be to lower taxes and how awesome it was that staff was able to do that, and that the recommendation is, I'm sure everything would be just fine if we did it. But at a time when literally nothing is going down in price, and we're talking about cutting projects and initiatives that I think most people want to see, and also be talking about reducing our millage rate, I'm having a lot of trouble understanding, other than, the optics of it, and obviously it reduces what people are paying at the end of the year. I'm having a lot of trouble understanding why we would do it. And the more we talk about it, that's where I keep going back to.
Yeah, I think to take action purely for optics
Yeah.
is not what we're here to do. And I just don't think it really serves the best interests of the community. I think all of us would be in favor of long-term tax reduction. I know I certainly am, but again, there's just so much value in the things that we're looking at undertaking here that people will see and enjoy on a day-to-day basis, as I said earlier. And again, the differential in what people will pay. And don't forget, for most of these homeowners, it's that property tax is a write-off anyway. So the actual cost is diminished by whatever tax bracket you're in. So if we want to get into, looking at micro numbers here, but I just think there's so many opportunities for us to really provide a value add, and I'd like to see us get those things done at this point. And then look, like I said, I think there'll be opportunities for us to lower taxes as we go forward.
Yeah, I'll state what I said earlier as well. Remembrance Park, it's our second priority behind public safety. And I don't want to do half a park. If we can do that and give them exactly what we told them we would do with the planning charrettes, where people came and gave countless hours of their own opinion, let's do that. I think a healthy rec center, a rec program, and a thriving parks program shows a strong, thriving community. And I think let's don't get us halfway there with a shell rock path, and we're still going to have to be sensitive to the neighbors that surround, the 13 parcels that surround that. So let's put all the money into that. Just as there are mobilization costs to do something twice, we're gonna have to train a firefighter this year, and we have to train another firefighter next year. So there's a cost to that as well. If we're gonna have 96%, if we're, by getting this, adding both shifts to 8 persons, 93% of the time, we're gonna have 6 people on there. At what point, does that overtime number that we have budgeted drop significantly as well? So it takes a little bit of sting out of that. There's still gonna be overtime, there's still gonna be FMLA, there's still gonna be workers' comp stuff. But if we can say, based on what the chief provided, that, anywhere from 93% of the time, if 40% of the time, we'll have 7 people. And it allows our fire, we want our fire and our police, we're a small community. And there's 1 chief, there's 3 captains, 3 lieutenants. So we have to provide them with a great environment. And I think, yeah, overtime is nice, but it gets to a point when they say, I want to do personal development for me as well. And they can't do that when there's 5 people on shift. So I think that there's mobilization costs to train people year after year, which is what we have to do. We can do them all at the same time. I'll defer to the chief and to Jeff to put their heads together, on what number would the real overtime look like based on that. Because if that can pay for part of that second person, I want this vote. I want this. I think this is what we said we would do. It's what our residents told us in a survey where they took their time to talk about what's important to them. And I think if we're up here to respond to residents, and I believe they spoke through that survey. And we spoke through what we put our priorities to be. So I think we keep the millage, at the maximum rate that we did, knowing what we have, again, not ever counting on what could happen down the road with some of these larger projects. But we have some coming in that are going to give us a little bit more breathing room. We want to, get our funds squared away. We want to get our reserves to the numbers that we as a council have committed to. I just don't think we can get there if we cut the millage rate.
Just to echo one more thing. I mean, I've said this before, but I had the opportunity, which I greatly appreciated, to run 3 full shifts with the fire and rescue folks. And it really opened my eyes to how valuable it is to have 3 people on that rescue truck. When you've got a serious medical situation, you need 2 people in the back. And we can't have that. And if we have it today, then we can't even take out the fire truck because that requires 3 people, and now we only got 2 left. So, again, you're right, Rick, and Patrick, you said the same thing. Public safety is the #1 responsibility of local government. Then other things fall behind that, but the parks, everything else we've all been talking about, I think, again, I'm kind of being redundant, but I just think they're so important that that's why I think we should go ahead and get these things done now while we can have the opportunity.
Vice Mayor, do you have anything else to add?
Nothing really to add. I am leaning kind of maybe if we did a compromise on the millage rate to cover the 8-man shift to make sure if we were to do them all instantly and relieve them on help, like if they're on a call, then immediately they have enough man and women power instantly. That's where I'm sitting.
And yeah, I don't think lowering the millage rate and lowering taxes is optics at all. I think it's some serious relief we can provide to our residents right now. So we're gonna have to compromise somehow because we need a 5-to-1 vote or a 5-0 vote for keeping it where it's at. And I don't like being that person, but everything in my gut, like I just don't think it's right to not lower the millage rate because I do think that we'll be able to find the funding, continue to find the funding for things for in future years. I don't know if the rest of the council received this spreadsheet, but our revenue for the past couple of years continues to exceed our impacts from inflation, from expenditures. So, I mean, we continue to receive way more revenue than the economy has hit us. And I just don't see how we can justify not giving some relief to the residents right now. I really can't.
Yeah, but Lori, Molly, that's looking backwards. We got to look forwards. And you know, we can do linear, what we have are linear models where we say, well, what if this, this, and this, and this? But they're not what you call stochastic or dynamic models. If the economy goes into a recession, now, some people are saying that's less likely. Other people are saying it could very well happen, you know, in the first half of next year. We've benefited because there's been turnover in real estate, so we've had a reset of housing values for those people who have come in and purchased or torn down and rebuilt. But you can't necessarily expect that that's going to continue at the pace that it has over these prior years. And as somebody said, we've got 90% of our homes, I think, we said, are homesteaded, right? So just because that's what's happened over the last few years, which is a very unusual economic environment with COVID and the ARC money and all these other things, there's no guarantee that's going to happen as we go forward. So I don't think we can make plans. We can't look at the future and say, okay, we've done this modeling and these are absolutes. We don't know whether in fact that will or will not be what happens the next 2, 3, 4 years out. What we do
Well, you're
know,
never going to know that, ever.
That's-
And any time a millage rate's
That's
been
right.
raised or lower, you don't know that.
But we
You go
know-
with the best information you have at hand.
That's right, but we know where we are now. And I'm saying with the information we have at hand, I believe the best decision is to keep the millage rate where it's at. For the very reason you're saying, we don't know what's going to happen a year, 2, 3, 4 years down the road. We hope with the new buildings and some of the revenues that those will generate, we do have that kind of in our back pocket. A lot of communities don't necessarily have that, but there are no guarantees that our revenues will continue to exceed inflation. So again, we know where we are now. We know what the picture that we have today. We know what we're capable of doing today if we maintain the millage rate where it's at. And I think that's the basis on which we should be making this decision. And again, I agree with Patrick. You know, to me, the reduction we're talking about in the tax rate is optics. It's not meaningful. It's not going to have a meaningful impact on anybody's financial situation. You can say that's insensitive. That's the reality. Those are the facts. I'm not going to deal in hyperbole here. So, you know, again, I'm not going to, we should be making decisions on optics or so we can feel good. We need to make decisions in the best interest of the community. And I don't think a de minimis reduction in taxes is in the best interest of the community. I think getting the things done that are before us is in the best interest of this community.
Okay, I will kindly disagree with you on that. That being said, any public comment? Mr. Bradford?
Thomas Bradford, 44 Chestnut Trail. I want to encourage Mayor Young and Vice Mayor Lori, I can't remember, sorry. Stick to your guns, and you will control the millage rate based upon that data that they told you. You want to know the other side of the coin for optics is, and I may be wrong about this number, in the last 2 fiscal years, the one we're in and the one that we're about to go in, you have received in excess of 35% increase in your tax dollars. And 3 of you are sitting here saying it's not enough. And any staff member or staff or group of elected officials can present to you at any time a meritorious list of projects that you would probably want to do. That isn't your job to come up with the list. Your job is to call the list because that's what the people need. And the you look at what we can afford, and it appears that 3 of you, your eyes are bigger than your stomach, is what the problem is. Just because you have a to-do list does not mean that you need to do it in every single fiscal year. Take your time and do what the people can afford. Molly has identified why people in this upcoming fiscal year may be very upset with a tax increase. So please keep that in mind.
Not increasing taxes.
Yeah, we're not increasing taxes. And Tom, I'm going to refer you back to the Great Recession when the council that was served at that time had to cut things to the bone. And as a result, a lot of infrastructure projects and other things got deferred because the revenues weren't there. So what the subsequent councils have tried to do is basically make up for that. And we're still in a catch-up mode. So I would disagree with you. I think at this point what we're trying to do is say we've identified a lot of infrastructure projects, whether it's water, whether it's through the village, whether it's sidewalks, roads, whatever it may be, and we're trying to address those projects when we have the opportunity. I don't know what the whole future holds. We could be back in a deep recession a couple of years from now, and we may be back in a situation where we've got to cull back significantly on expenses as we have in prior periods. But as I said, right now, there's an opportunity, and I think the things that we're talking about delivering to our village residents, as Rick has amply said, are things they identified. These are things that they've said they've wanted and things that they would like us to deliver on, and that's what we're trying to do. So, no, our eyes are not closed. We're not insensitive, but we're trying to deliver on the things that people have indicated that they have a desire for.
Any other public comment? Okay, so we are not in agreement, so I think another workshop's probably gonna be necessary since we have to roll into another one. Jeremy, based on the feedback you've received, do you think you can put together, I mean, I know putting you guys to work, but put up some different scenarios with different millage rates of how we can give some relief and some of the priorities that were brought up. Think outside the box a little bit more with Remembrance Park and what we can do and work your magic, and then we'll, Lori, you guys will work on Senate date for the next budget workshop?
Yep.
Okay. Does that work for everyone?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, with that, Vice Mayor, you good?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, with that being said, meeting adjourned.
Next.
Do we need a 5-minute break, or is everyone good to roll into the next one?
I'm good.
We can run the next.
I'm gonna grab water.
Okay,
Keep going, I'm just gonna grab some water right outside. I need
All
to
right.
stop for me.
All right, it is 6:05 p.m. and this is our July 31st, 2023 regular workshop meeting. Lori, can I get roll call?
Mayor Young,
Here.
Vice Mayor Brandon,
Here via Zoom.
Councilmember Deambra.
Here.
Councilmember Painter,
Here.
Councilmember Sartori.
Here.
All right, first item on the agenda is update on land development regulations from the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council Commercial Corridor Plan. Lance?
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. As you recall, this actually was heard by you all on May the 30th.
Oh, sorry, I haven't. I wasn't ready.
All right. So in 2022, Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council conducted a 5-day charrette, which obtained feedback from the residents and members of the business community. The goal of it was to obtain feedback and help mold the recommendations for the design guidelines that they have for the corridor plan. In November 2022, the Village Council adopted the corridor master plan, which is on the left-hand side. Following that adoption, we had a few meetings with Dana Little, who is the Urban Design Director for Treasure Coast, as well as our own Jeremy Allen, Village Manager. And after that, we had a council workshop for feedback and direction. So what did we get? So we received some key recommendations from the report. The key recommendations include the following, which are design districts or districts, overlay districts essentially, frontage standards, civic open space, measuring of height, drive-through buildings and gas stations, location of parking, primary streets, dark sky night lighting, and green design. From that, we had a table which includes the prioritized action list, which was put together by staff as well as with council's direction. This was discussed 3 months ago that we had at the, or 2 months ago at the May meeting. So I'm not gonna harp too much on this, but we have letter A through L, which include the following, which is adopting the commercial corridor plan, which has already been done. Begin discussions with the Palm Beach County related to Old Dixie and the Village Boulevard roundabout, exploring potential canopy planting programs such as like adopt a tree or something to that extent. Begin discussions with FDOT and Palm Beach County regarding Old Dixie. Considering some type of incentives or whatnot for the town center or Main Street. Begin the land development recommendations, which you will see shortly, as well as adopting some type of roadway designs, etc. So this actually looks different from what you saw in May. In May, I actually mentioned that we'd have 2 overlay districts. Now we actually are doing 3, which would be more in line with what Treasure Coast had put forth. I know that Treasure Coast mentioned a town center, We don't want anything saying town. Everything should be village. So what we have here is we have the US 1 overlay, the Village Center overlay, and then we have the Tequesta Drive overlay. So let's start first with Tequesta Drive overlay. So Tequesta Drive overlay would essentially span west of the FEC Railroad and head over towards the Gallery Square North and also the First Baptist area. It'd stop at the C1. And essentially what that would include the C1, C2, and it wouldn't be mixed use, so, but it'd strictly just be C1 and C2. Currently, our code obviously doesn't contemplate the overlay, so we had to put what the purpose and intent would be, which would be to preserve and protect the neighborhood character, aesthetics, and uses permitted within the corridor, while providing the opportunity for limited retail and service uses in a manner that would be convenient to and yet not disruptive to the residential areas. So below, we have a little set of bullets here of what would be within that corridor, that overlay. So formula restaurants would be prohibited. We would require that this overlay be some type of small scale character and charm. The facades would be closer to the corridor. Parking would be towards the rear of the facilities rather than the front, which is how it is right now, and have some type of civic open spaces, landscaping, and tree canopies. This is what the code says right now for these two zoning districts, which include the C1 and C2 as mentioned. So currently, the C1 zoning district has a 15-foot setback, whereas C2 has 25 feet. And also, C1 has a maximum of 2 stories / 35 feet in height, and C2 has 4 stories / 50 feet. And then we get into the US 1 overlay. So the US 1 overlay would essentially be almost all the parcels that are fronting US 1, so it'd be the mixed-use zoning district as well as the C2 zoning district, and that would include pretty much all of our commercial plazas that we have, such as Tequesta Shops, Village Square, Fashion Mall, as well as we have the Bank of America site that's over there, so that would also be encompassing of it. And these are the same site requirements as I mentioned for the past overlay. So C2 would be one of the zoning districts that's over there, which has a 25-foot front setback. Mixed use would have depending on if it's residential or commercial, has a 10-foot or 0 feet if it's commercial. And then the building heights for both of those are the same. It's 4 stories or 50 feet. So the intent for this one would be more so completely different from our small scale overlays. So we would encourage and provide for enhanced physical appearance through increased landscaping, and then also have some type of public and private property. I know that was discussed at the last meeting, how we were gonna do, for example, like landscaping in the public portion compared to the private portion. But then we also wanna have some type of interaction with the public and private realms. So in this particular overlay, as you've noticed, the overlay will allow for formula restaurants, whereas the other overlays will not. It will still also include parking in the rear of the facilities, as well as we still want the facades to be fronting of the corridor and have some type of civic open space or landscaping and tree canopies requirements. And then we get into the last overlay, which is the Village Center. And this area will be more so encompassing of the Main Street as well as Bridge Road. I know that during the charrette process, the biggest area that they really wanted to focus was like the Bridge Road and how they can do things with the medians, as well as the Main Street area in case something gets done at some point for Paradise Park, what that would look like. So that corridor includes the C2, C3, and mixed use. And these are the requirements allowed for that, which is C2, as I mentioned, is 25 feet in the front, 4 stories / 50 feet. C3 is 3 stories / 40 feet, and that has a 15-foot setback of the front. And mixed use has, depending on if it's residential or commercial, it's 10 feet in the front or 0 feet, but then also 4 stories or 50 feet in height. So the intent for this one will be a little bit similar to, it's kind of a hybrid in a sense, but it's a little bit similar more so to the Tequesta Drive overlay, is to encourage architectural character and diversity of uses such as residential, commercial, civic spaces, which would be if they wanted to put a park or something like that, that'd be something civic, while providing a pedestrian friendly environment and connectivity between Tequesta Drive, Bridge Road, and Old Dixie. So this corridor does not allow for formal restaurants. Parking in the rear, which you'll notice that these things are kind of echoed throughout the overlays. Facades fronting the corridor, as well as the civic open spaces, landscaping, and street canopies. So now you're gonna start noticing, just because these are very similar throughout, these are the requirements that we set forth. So frontage standards. So we essentially would require that the building be closer to the right-of-way and allow more interaction for the pedestrian environment. And then also we'd have requirements that would change the existing setbacks. So currently, as I showed before, some of the requirements that are there are 15 feet, some are 20, some are 0. Based on how we have our code written right now, there is a landscape buffer requirement of 15 feet. So essentially you can't put your building in the 15 feet. So at a minimum, you'd be able to put it at 15 feet. Now, the way that we have this written, it's 20 feet, just to give additional 5 feet of, whether that be walkways or something to that extent. But also, since we want the building to be fronting the corridor, we allowed them to have some type of arcades or stoops or something to that extent that would be a little bit closer to the setback. And then the diagram on the left will essentially show that. So as you go up in height as well, we're recommending that if you pass the level 2 or a second story, that the building get pushed back a little bit. So that would more so apply to the buildings that are allowed to have 4 stories or 3 stories or something to that extent. Wouldn't apply for the ones that are 2-story requirements. So this just shows what the allowable frontage types are. So as you see on all of them, it mentions that the maximum setback, and our code right now, it says that it's minimums, so it's a minimum of this feet from the front, or minimum of this from the side. We're doing maximum, so essentially it can't be any closer than this, any further than this, sorry. Porches, stoops, forecourts, as well as shop fronts, those are allowed in the Tequesta Drive overlay. US 1 would include stoops, shop fronts, balconies, and forecourts. All of these are pretty similar throughout, and this is all based off in line with what Treasure Coast put forth in their report. And then these are just examples of each one of the ones that it got cut off at the bottom. But we have shop fronts, and we have stoops and porches, the bracketed balcony, we have the arcade, and then to the left we have the forecourt. So what are some landscape elements that we'd like for these type of overlays? So some of the landscape that we'd like would be some type of street trees, which would provide for comfort, as well as some type of shade. So what we have here is we said that the street trees shall be canopy species planted in the public right-of-way directly in the front of the property, and also that we want to ensure that the high quality, architecturally compatible, and that they're consistent landscape developed along the corridor. So this was through Treasure Coast. Treasure Coast mentioned that they'd like to have some type of civic open space, which isn't in our code currently. So what we came up with is that there's different types of civic open space. So depending on the size of the property, essentially, they'd be required to have X number of civic open space, which I'll show on the next slide. This is just to show you that there are different types that you can do. So in the middle, top left, there's green, which would have a specific requirement of 1,500 square feet. Plaza, which would be the same. Playground, which would be 2,500. A square would be 10,000. If there is something that would ever be 10,000, then that would be included in that part that they can do. Attached green, which would be generally between 2,000 to 6,000 square feet. Forecourt would be less than 250, and then pedestrian passageway would be 250 as well. So these are the actual requirements for civic open space. So if you happen to have a new development that comes in after council decides if they want to move forward with this or whatnot, and an ordinance is passed at whatever point that is, then the new development or additions that would be greater than or equal to 20% would essentially have to meet this requirement, and that would be 5% of their total site square footage would be required to be civic open space. And then also, I know that this was mentioned at the last meeting by Councilman Sartori. What we decided was that at some point, they still would have to meet the landscape buffers, but we'd have some type of allowance that they cannot do more than 25% of the landscape buffers. That would be for civic open space. And that can be, whether it be benches or a fountain or something like that. So you still would have your buffers, but you essentially would allow them to do something innovative and creative with the spaces. Parking in the rear. So parking in service areas shall be accessed, assessed through in the rear and the side of the building. We don't want them in the front anymore. And then also surface parking. So we're trying to deter people from just putting up surface parking and have like a sea of asphalt. Put some type of shrubbery or something like that to buffer it so it's hidden a little bit. And then also that the front setbacks of the area shall be detailed to the public right-of-way design and be established with shaded like trees or things of that nature, and organized landscaping and elements that will ensure superior public realm. And then these are just diagrams of how they can do parking in the rear. So figure 1 essentially is the building fronting the right-of-way with 2 primary streets. So essentially if you happen to see it on the left, that is, you essentially would have to go around one of those 2 primary streets and exit through the back. The one in the middle is if the building is fronting the front of the right-of-way primary street, but then they have a secondary street on the other corner. Essentially they'd have to access it through the secondary street. And then we also came up with the idea of if they happen to have an alleyway, because I know that there are some properties off of US 1 that happen to have alleyways. So if worse come to worse, if they needed to park, they would just access it through the alleyway. And these are also just a guideline, they're not to scale and whatnot. So drive-through buildings and gas stations. So currently the way that the code is written, that it's essentially only allowed off of US 1. And that includes properties that are mixed use and C2, such as the Sunoco on the corner, there's the 7-Eleven to the north. The common drive-throughs are for gas stations and fast food establishments, which are typically in the front of the road. As mentioned, we prefer that they're not in the front anymore. But there are some cases in some municipalities, some areas that they have drive-throughs on the side or whatnot, which are normally for like banks or pharmacies or whatnot. So what we're proposing is that the drive-throughs would be permitted on the side or the rear of the building, and that they should be screened from the public view by landscaping or something similar to that. And that drive-throughs would be prohibited in the front of the building except for gas stations, which should still be screened. I know the last thing that was mentioned in the past council workshop was landscaping. We did actually reach out to Steve Parker, who is our resident landscape architect consultant. These are some of the recommendations that Steve mentioned. So as of right now, in January when we passed or February, when we passed the code changes for the landscaping, he mentioned that we beefed up the landscape buffers, which was mentioned before. It went to 15 feet. We also increased the requirements for the height of the trees, so it was 12 feet, now it's 16 feet. We required irrigation plans, and then irrigation plans shall meet the Florida-friendly requirements. We also included enhanced the prohibited plant species to eliminate some of the non-native and invasive species. We increased the required amount of shrubs for single family, and then we did some clarification on certain native plant requirements. What Steve mentioned is that actually our code is pretty on par with these new updates. However, there may be some additional recommendations that he put forth, which would be to increase the size of the landscape islands. That would be more so towards the private realm of it rather than the public realm. I know that Vice Mayor Brandon mentioned at the workshop how we can kind of increase that a little bit, if we can do anything with the private areas of the shopping plazas. So what Steve mentioned is that maybe we can change it from 6 feet to 8 feet to include a little bit more room for the trees and the root systems. And then he also mentioned that as of right now, we have a foundation planting requirement. So essentially where you have your building, there's supposed to be a 4-foot requirement for trees. He said that potentially maybe we can beef that up a little bit to 8 feet, just to allow for more trees or more palms to be put there and their root systems. And that's it.
Great, thank
I'm
you.
open for any questions.
Okay, Council?
Lance, thank you again for all your great work and follow-up. The only thing that strikes me, and I guess it's just more my own opinion, is just the parking in the rear. I mean, can you give me an example right now of something here locally like that we have that? I'm trying to think, people walking into the rear, if it's a multi-tenant building as well, you're typically you're parking in the back and you see the doors numbered and you see dumpsters and all that. So I'm not really sold on the parking in the rear. I just don't, but I'm trying to think of something that might be there currently, so I can say, oh, yeah.
The only one that I can think of, which would include, which is not really per se parking in the rear, but, so, as we know, the Mastriani building was just approved X number of years ago. They have the building fronting the road for the most part, and then they have like an alleyway in the middle. So in that particular case, I mean, it's more parked towards the rear than it is the front, because they have the building facade fronting US 1, which is the major corridor there. And as you saw on,
You know, a good example, not in DeQuest at all, because I don't know if there are any, but
Yeah.
on Military near Abacoa, where is it Leftovers, that plaza?
Oh,
You know, I mean, it would obviously have to be like
Parking, so
very
it's not so
specific.
much the rear of the building, it's just
Yeah,
it's
like
behind the building,
the
Correct.
street.
away from the street.
Correct.
There's probably a way to enter from the street, but the primary entry is still from the.
correct.
Like
And-
PJ
and-
Commons is another good
Yeah,
example.
Correct.
All right,
Yeah.
thanks, I couldn't
It
visualize
is
it.
kind of weird.
And we tried to kind of stay away from more so other municipal. We tried to kind of focal this, but
Yeah.
that is a good example. Is PGA Commons, where PGA is the major thoroughfare there, and you enter through the back and you park back there, and then you still have that interaction with PGA because they have tables and they have, the restaurants in the front.
My visual concept
Yeah.
was incorrect, so it makes sense now, thank you. That's it.
You all good?
Yeah.
Okay. So I participated in the charrette, and I mean, I think you guys have captured everything. I walked around to a lot of tables, kind of hear what other tables were saying, and obviously went through our presentations, and I think it's perfect. The only question I had, after I just said I participated in the charrette, Cypress Drive, did we look much at our portion of Cypress Drive as part of this? Did it get captured in any of those corridors? I don't think so, right?
Not
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
It was discussed,
Yeah.
but there wasn't much, I guess, big detail on Cypress.
Okay.
It was more so. I know the biggest detail was really on the Main Street area.
It's
and
a
then-
short, it's a very short
It's
corridor.
a short span.
I totally get it. But no, generally, I think you guys did a great job. I think it's a good mix. What I like is within our, US 1 is obviously within TEQUESTA and very much, it's our primary commercial corridor when it comes to vehicle traffic. So we're allowing the, you don't call them chain restaurants, what do you call them?
Formula restaurant.
Formula restaurants there, so we're not saying absolutely not.
Correct.
But what I consider TEQUESTA's corridor, like if you are a resident of TEQUESTA Drive and Bridge Road, those are gonna be that's our little world. I like that you guys prohibited them there, but I also think it's important to not just say, absolutely not, we can't do it, although I would love to see them altogether not happen. I know we can't do that. So I think the balance there, I think, was really good. I mean, the hardest part is I think these are all great ideas, but, we have so much existing development in place, obviously we can't just like magically move the buildings forward and put parking in the back. So it's gonna be working with the developers coming in and, but like the last council meeting, when we had the gentleman come in from the Bank of America, I think somebody asked had they even looked at the master plan, and I think the answer was no. And had they, I think his answer was no, but let's just pretend it was. Had they, I think they would have probably brought something a little different, just knowing what our priorities were, even though that was, US 1 and what they were proposing was perfectly acceptable. But generally, I think you guys did an awesome job. And I look forward to seeing what TEQUESTA looks like in like 20 years or 15, 20 years when this is all coming to fruition.
Thank you.
And real quick, if you don't mind, just to, because it relates to
Yeah.
One of your comments, so, because it was similar to one I had. And I think this would all be the village center overlay, but I did notice like Old Dixie Village, Main Street, and Cypress weren't on there. And on Treasure Coast, they had under Town Center, they did have different frontage types for all those streets. And I really did like that variety because it's not just like, because right now it seems like a little blanket over everything. So having that variety of like different frontage types and really addressing the different streets. So I do think we should pick up, and it was the frontage standards from the Town Center. If we
Oh,
could
yeah,
pick
yeah.
those up for those other streets, I think that would be really great.
You're saying for the other streets, mean like Cypress and things like that? or-
Yeah, it was Old
Old Dixie,
Dixie,
Cypress.
Village, Main Street, and Cypress. I think you had Bridge Road in there,
Yeah.
but those four were not. Okay, I'll hold my other comments for later. Thank you.
I'm going to agree with pretty much everything that's already been said. I do have one question, and I don't know, maybe Molly or Patrick can address this too. One concern is, are we creating, if we make these changes, are there any parcels of property that would be impacted where we could be making it economically non-viable for somebody to come in and enhance, upgrade, or redevelop? Just, that's a question. The comment I wanted to make is with respect to rear parking on US 1. I think I made this statement a number of months ago. When we did the Ostrate building, we pushed it back, parking was in the front, they've landscaped it in the front, done all their landscaping. Obviously with the Mastriani building, as you alluded to, we brought it forward. And I said, well, it'll be interesting to see what people's responses are now that we have two examples, one back, one forward. I can tell you, my ears are burning with comments from people who do not like those buildings on US 1 being brought forward. They just feel that, you know, those are much bigger buildings, generally speaking, or have the potential to be much bigger buildings. And the comments I've been getting is they would have rather seen that building pushed back away from the road, as the Ostrate building is currently. So that's the only area where I think, I do like the rear parking. In the other areas, I think trying to create, you know, walkable areas where more like, almost like cafes or, you know, that kind of an ambiance, I think really works in the other areas. I'm not sure the rear parking necessarily works on US 1, and I think I'd like to keep more of an open mind as far as whether we mandate that or take that up on a building by building basis, because like I said, I've gotten so many comments from people at this point that do not like that building having been brought forward. They would have rather seen it pushed back, so for what that's worth.
So the other zoning district, or overlays, you'd be more so fine with the rear, parking in the rear?
Yeah,
but
I'm
for-
fine with the other
For
one.
US 1, it'd
But
be.
the US 1 is where I have a concern.
I think too, the Mastriani building does not have frontage on US 1, so I think that's part of the problem, because I don't disagree. It kind of looks a little off. I mean, it's going to look much better when it's complete landscaping's done. I mean, it's not done, but it doesn't have any frontage. So I think bringing the frontage definitely helps with that. And then they have a third story. They don't have a step back. You are suggesting having a step back, again, to like break that up from US 1, because it can look a little stark if like every building looks
Yeah.
like how Mastriani's building does. That would look awful.
No, and I agree. Well, I think once it's completely done, you're right. There's, even if on the portion that faced the street, there was even if there was a false facade, but it did appear. But again, I've gotten just tons of feedback where people said, why didn't we push it back like the Ostrate building? And I said, well, this is what came out of the SHREP process. And so now, like I said, we've got two examples, and I think it may be prudent of us to kind of talk more with our residents about, is there a preference, or again, is it a matter of the building design, and maybe
That
there's some
dictate.
flexibility there depending on what somebody's coming forth with. And that's it.
Vice Mayor?
Okay, so Lance, I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so when I look at the Tequesta Drive overlay, and let's see, the next one, maybe it was two different ones. Okay, so it's actually the US 1 overlay on page 8. And particularly on Tequesta Drive in US 1, let's talk about the Bank of America building.
Yes,
You
ma'am.
have your grid going through part of that property.
Yep.
And then on the other one, on page 14, the Village Center overlay, it's wrapping around those properties as well. So are those properties going to be in a single district, or are they gonna be in double districts?
It would be-
How are we gonna decide, for example, the Bank of America building property and the CVS property, which one they're gonna fall into?
So, for example, the Bank of America property and CVS, those would be US 1. We can always
Okay.
change the way that the map looks. Those are excluded from the Village Center overlay. Village
Okay.
Center overlay.
I was just wondering,
yeah.
because I don't wanna double dose on those properties for code restrictions.
No, ma'am.
Want to be kind of nice. I do agree with Mr. Diambra about frontage. I do remember talking with Dana Little when he came to talk to us as a council. I remember telling him, I actually like the parking lots in the front because we're a small town village. So when some of our businesses are having events, a lot of times they occur in the front of the business, kind of in the parking lot. Let's use TBC as an example. And I feel like that's much more visually inviting when residents can see that there's something going on. It intrigues them and they're more willing to go over and check it out, and it brings more people in. If it's behind the building and you're just driving by it, you don't get that, ooh, what's that going on? So I do remember saying that at that meeting. I'm not dead set on having buildings right on the roadway or sidewalk, but I understand where it was going. And there are residential properties behind a lot of the US 1 on the east side. So maybe it's just the east side that we consider that for. And on the west side of US 1, we keep them pushed back. And I also, Mayor brought it up, I was going to ask about Cypress Drive, if we can include it. I don't want to leave it as a stepchild hanging out there by
Okay.
itself, because that area is turning over with active businesses. And I would like to see that included in everything we're trying to enhance. And that's pretty much it.
So, just a question. So, pertaining to, because you mentioned TBC, so would you say that
Yeah.
what Councilmember Diambra mentioned as far as maybe reworking the US 1 corridor to allow it in the front, or?
Yeah, I'm not sold on keeping the buildings right at the road, because when you drive down that, if both sides, the east and the west, have buildings right on the road, you're gonna feel like you're driving down a tunnel. And because new development that comes in, it's gonna be higher, no matter what. It's gonna be 3-4 stories, so you really are gonna end up feeling like you're going down a tunnel of concrete. So maybe the compromise is, on the east side, they're closer to the road, because there's residential behind those. And some of them are Tequesta, not just unincorporated. And on the west side of US 1, maybe we have those redevelopments pushed back so the parking lot is in front. I was just trying to think of a compromise.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, my comments are in no particular order, just going through my notes on the agenda. The formula, so it's formula restaurant, and I know that we were talking about formula businesses during the Treasure Coast, and Stuart had a really great example to apply to all formula businesses. So I just want to make sure we just want to do restaurants only, or if we want to do something more similar to Stuart and have it for businesses. And they kind of had some really great guidelines with like distances from other, similar establishments, aesthetics, how the aesthetics have to, it can't be your standard, like if McDonald's came, it couldn't be your, normal, prototype. It would have to fit the village. So, I mean, did we want to go down that road, or do we just want to consider formula restaurants and call it a day?
So is the question to lump in just general businesses, not just restaurants? Is that what you're asking?
Well, keep it how it is, or look into doing something a little more similar to what Stuart did. Because I'm sure you guys all have been in downtown, so it's very similar, right? Kind of vibe. So I don't, I think it's a good municipality to relate to and something they've done. And even if we do just keep it with the restaurant, I do hope, because I know you put a kind of a draft text amendment, that we would maybe elaborate a little more with some guidelines.
Yeah, I agree. Do you know how they, as far as the overall aesthetic and design of the building, how they handled that? Do you know, or
They have,
like a design guideline?
it's written out in their
Okay.
code, yeah.
I think it's a great idea, yeah.
And then we also keep, I mean, can we do just restaurants, or do you have to keep it more broad? I mean, how does that work, so you're not, like, don't get us in a bind that
Well-
we're just doing restaurants, but every other formula
Yeah, I
business is
didn't think about
okay?
Let me paint a little bigger picture that addresses your question and also Mr. D'Ambra's question about economic viability. So we started this process back in 2022, and in the middle of us going through this process, the legislature adopted Senate Bill 250. Senate Bill 250 talks about municipalities located entirely or partially within 100 miles of the Hurricane Ian or Hurricane Nicole landfall. We qualify for that. We are in that zone. For local governments that fit into that category, Senate Bill 250 says that a municipality may not, among other things, propose or adopt more restrictive or burdensome amendments to its comp plan or LDRs before October 1st of 2024. So if we're going to go down this road and we're going to implement these overlay zones and they're going to be mandatory, you're going to want a factual finding that the changes are not more burdensome or restrictive. Change doesn't automatically equal more burdensome or more restrictive. You can have a change that actually loosens things up and provides more opportunity to do different things. You could have changes that maybe take away from here but give more over there for a zero-sum result. But if you impose a change before October 1st of 2024, say, we're going to require less height or more setback or less slot cover, whatever it is that makes it more burdensome or more restrictive, and we get challenged, that LDR amendment will be deemed void from its inception. So, and I'm not saying anything in particular in these overlays are in fact more restrictive or burdensome, but somebody's going to need to do that analysis and give you a factual foundation to stand on where you can say, no, it's not more burdensome because or it's not more restrictive because that's going to be very important. So, to the extent right now our code doesn't address formula anything. If you say, well, you can't have formula restaurants or any formula business, is that going to be a more restrictive use? Maybe.
So, yeah.
Even just a formula restaurant, Mr. Painter, you kind of said, we're not taking it away completely, we're forcing it into this area. Is that more restrictive? I don't know as I sit here. But somebody's going to need to be able to give you a factual opinion that, no, it's not because of this. And if it is and you want to do this, then my advice would be, right now the way the law is written, you have to wait a year. And quite frankly, even if you push the go button tonight, we started and really the most aggressive schedule would be LPA in August, first reading in September, second reading in October. If you had second reading October of 2024, you're exactly 1 year down the road, and then you're out of this Hurricane Nicole and Hurricane Ian window. So that's that's going to be an important determination that you're going to want to have before you adopt this.
And Keith, based on what you're saying too, like when we say formula business, so what exactly does that mean? Does that mean if a State Farm office wants to open up?
That's a great question. We need to define what that means.
Yeah, is that a formula business? And then the other thing, which we've talked about in the past, is, if you put these things into place, even after October 1st, and it does create an additional economic burden for somebody who owns a parcel of land, are you still at risk because you have changed something prospectively that affects a current landowner and affects the value of their property vis-à-vis, the day before.
So this discussion that I'm having with you right now talks about this Senate Bill 250. It does nothing in terms of a Burt J. Harris claim. That law is still on the books. That doesn't change. So, you always have to be cognizant of the idea of taking away investment-backed expectations and creating an inordinate burden on vested development rights. That's still on the books as well. But right now, we have this additional layer that, more restrictive or burdensome is a pretty low threshold.
So if we were going to do an analysis, we really need to take into account not only this particular law, but the pre-existing.
And there are, yes, I guess is the short answer without dragging this out.
Madam Mayor, council members, when we were working and putting together this proposed code text amendment, we have a in-depth discussion with Mr. Davis. And one avenue that we discussed was that maybe it should be non-mandatory and optional, these overlays, at least until October 1st, 2024. So that could, so obviously the applicant will have the flexibility and the option to comply with the overlay or to comply with the existing code, the underlying zoning district.
Thank you. And yeah, I mean, we've been down this road with the beach road design guidelines and the ordinances, and Keith was heavily involved. I mean, I think we all know what our responsibility and obligations are there to make sure anything we change is defensible and within the bounds of the law. And so, but yeah, I think some of it we can do optional. Once we get through this process, maybe half of it isn't burdensome and we can pass it now, and then we have to wait, make the rest of it optional until October 2024, and then we can make it mandatory. So there's probably different ways we can cut it up depending on what, the analysis is. I don't think we should slow down the process because we know how long it takes to do all that.
No, I would agree with you. I just think we just need to make sure that an analysis has been done. So as Keith said, that if we get challenged, we can show that we've done our homework and we're in a defensible position, that's all.
Yep. Okay, real quick on DeQuesta Drive overlay. I think there is a little portion of Seabrook that the north side of Seabrook we need to wrap in there. I thought was on Treasure Coast. And yeah, just like comparison to current setbacks, that kind of stuff we just talked about, but we need to make sure we're looking at, the civic open spaces, how those were calculated. And then I don't know, I know other municipalities have options where developers can pay out the civic open space to another certain fund, or they can put the civic open space somewhere else within the municipality. So I don't know if maybe think about having some options there to make it a little more flexible. Again, in case it's they can't get it down their property, but there's another option to satisfy it. I think that's helpful to have different options. I think that might be it. Give me one more second. I didn't understand the playground in the civic open space. What is that? Like having a playground in the civic open space. Is that something we should keep in there, or should we? It was in the text amendment. I don't know that.
Yeah, it's on here too.
Oh,
I have
okay.
the graphic. Yeah, to the middle left. I mean, it's more so like a small tot lot or something to that extent. I mean, if council decided they don't like that, then we can always take that out, and it'll just be more so the other ones that are there. But it was kind of like a middle ground for, we have the green, the plaza, and then it kind of jumps after that to the 2,000-ish square footage, so we kind of put something that would be a middle ground, which was playground, but we can always change that if deemed necessary.
All right, that was the rest of my comments. Council, any other comments or questions?
No.
No? All right, can I open it for public comment? Mr. Bradford, you raised your hand first.
quickly. I know that Molly, Lori, and Frank all know that I'm a fan of parking in the rear. However, the Mastriani building has brought into focus some problems that could exist. And the problem there primarily is two things, in my opinion. It appears that we did not identify the primary road. Because Mr. Mastriani has had, his main entrance is to the east with the parking behind the building, and the superior or primary road is US 1. And yet there's no real entrance feature on that facade that faces US 1. So one of two things ought to happen in the future: that you require an entrance feature if the parking is going to be 100% behind the building, or a compromise, instead of, you know, all the front yard parking that you want, would be to only allow parking in the front that is directly adjacent to the building. And so then that way you would have one row. Then there would be the aisle, the asphalt or cement to traverse there, and then the green setback, and then the sidewalk and the road. So I know it doesn't go completely to my preference for rear, but it would help the way the building looks and or allow for a little bit of parking. And on that particular street, I do agree that on all of the other ones you talked about, you should strive for rear yard. The other thing is, I do agree with the comments that Rick and Patrick and others made about, you know, this is a great thing. And I too was at the charrette, and I think that it's a good thing to do for the village. It will take time, like Patrick said. It's not happening overnight. But in regard to Senate Bill 250, I would say the best thing for you to do is, number one, adopt the ordinance after you've done the remaining homework, effective October 1, 2024. That way it's on the books. Lance, Director of Community Development, whoever can say, hey, this is coming, but you don't have to do that right now. So that would help you show people what that neighborhood is going to potentially look like over time. And it lets the developer know this is the way the village is heading. So I would do that, and that's your way of letting them know what will be effective 10/1/2024, and they could have the option to do it today. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mrs. Watkins?
Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to mention, for many years now, we've had the little office plaza, strip mall, whatever you want to call it, next to the mobile station, which is very close to the street. And for business that is primarily offices, that may be fine. If it was a business not office-related, I find right at the street would be difficult, and I don't think it'd be attractive at all to have a building like that end up with signs having to be posted on the back side of the building at the road. Just a thought. I also appreciate Vice Mayor Brandon's comments about thinking about whether you want to allow this, like Mastriani's building, on both sides of the road, supposing, this is hypothetical, if the townhouse project that's going next to Publix gets sold and another business wants to get in there, even if it's condos, townhouses, and build solid up against the road, almost across from Mr. Mastriani's building, now your road looks really hovered upon, which I don't think would be particularly attractive. And the other thing I just wanted to mention to you all, when the discussion comes up about Bridge Road, I want everyone to consider budget tire. You've talked about gas stations. I want to make sure that business is protected from having any kind of constraints put on it, because it obviously needs the parking in the front there for his cars that are being worked on. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comment? No? Okay, so what are the next steps on this? I mean, do you guys have enough direction to keep working, or what?
Yeah, I think he's got quite a few notes, so I think we'll bring it back to a workshop. It sounds like we have some time, and so I think there's enough changes to warrant another workshop for this.
Okay. All right. Moving on, agenda item 2, discussion on artificial turf. Lynn.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Village Council. Lynn Britt for the Building Department. So the item before you concerns artificial turf, which has been increasing in popularity, and more homeowners in Tequesta are requesting the use of artificial turf. Recently, the EAC recommended revising the village's current code regarding artificial turf. A comprehensive study of artificial turf was recently conducted by the City of Belle Isle, Florida, which included an environmental data analysis, staff report, artificial turf comparison, and resident survey. And a link to the information was provided to Village Council within the memorandum for this item. As a result of the study, Belle Isle recently amended its ordinance to now allow its residents up to 35% artificial turf. Now, previously, the City of Clearwater requested an advisory opinion regarding whether artificial turf is allowed per Florida Statute 373.185. The opinion from the Attorney General's office was that Florida Section 373.185 prohibits a local government from enacting an ordinance which would prevent a property owner from implementing the Florida-friendly landscaping. And Florida-friendly landscaping includes non-living materials, and by inference, artificial turf. Accordingly, the Village of Tequesta cannot prohibit artificial turf outright, but can place reasonable restrictions. The village's current code allows up to 10% artificial turf within the percentage of total non-living materials as a component of a landscape plan. And a landscape permit is required for the implementation of a landscape plan. So for these reasons, village staff does not recommend any changes at this time, unless Village Council does want to recommend an increase in the percentage of artificial turf allowed. Any questions?
Thank you. All right, Council?
No, I have none.
No.
Go ahead.
I don't think I do.
No, I was going to say there was a great documentary that was talking about the role of natural landscapes in the reduction of carbon. If that where people are concerned about that, and they talked about how any of these artificial turfs eliminate that process and actually result in more carbon being in the air. So I think keeping it at where it's limited now, so if somebody wants a putting green or whatever, that's great. But having whole yards in artificial turf is contrary to what we're trying to do environmentally. So I'm fine we're having it where it's at right now.
Can I just ask a question real quick? So the 10%, it can be front or back, front or backyard, as long as the 10% threshold is met?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Is that something we've ever looked at in the past, is really just allowing it in the rear of a house versus the front? Or has it always just been a straight threshold?
As far as I'm aware, it's always been a straight threshold.
Okay. All right, just curious.
I think I included, Mayor Young found it, the North Palm ordinance, I think, which does prohibit it in the front, or it has some boundaries.
Yeah.
I think it's been a week or two since I put that in there, but, that could be an option for council to consider too. Obviously we have a recommendation, but if you guys have citizens that are complaining about the way it looks in front, or, that type of thing, other than the environmental, argument that you could have, if you're just talking about aesthetics, if citizens are concerned about that, you could limit it. And Keith has probably several options of that too. In my conversation with him, he's seen it, multiple different scenarios with artificial turf. So if that's something you guys want to consider, it's just whatever you guys as a council feel like.
And as an example, the City of Belle Isle allows pervious artificial turf in the front yard, but impervious, they require a variance.
Okay. Is most artificial turf that goes in the village at least, is it pervious or impervious?
Well, we don't check the material because it is allowed per se.
So
yeah.
we just, okay. Okay.
The other note I'll say is this has become very popular, which I think is why it's relevant today to have a conversation about it, as we are getting more and more requests in the building department to have that. So it's very popular among citizens, but, you know, what council feels ultimately as a whole, so.
Lynn, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
The 10%, is that based on the property size or the green space size?
So the City of Belle Isle bases their 35% on the total lot size. We base ours, so we require at least 30% opened landscape space, and that 10% is only of that landscape space. So ours is a very small percentage overall.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I would actually like to leave it the way that it is. I would be open to considering only allowing it in the backyard and primarily for drainage issues. The compaction that is placed underneath the AstroTurf, no matter if you get the cheap kind, the medium kind, or the high Cadillac kind, they completely compact the ground underneath, and it doesn't absorb as great as even just mulch and dirt. So I'm not against it, but if we're gonna be having our roads done and new drainage put in some areas, be considerate of where is all that drainage going. And some of it looks nice in the front yard, but some people choose a really, really tacky fake kind that looks really off. I wouldn't like to live in a Barbie land, so I would consider putting it only in the backyard, but I do think that we should keep it the same in the code at 10%. Allow some of it, but not necessarily an entire yard, and that's it.
I had kind of the same question about where that 10% comes from, because there are homes that have their entire front yard artificial turf. It's got to be more than 10%. So how, or is that 10%? Because I mean, that's how I'm trying to like get the visual in my head. What is 10%?
It depends on the calculation of the overall lot size. It depends how much they have in the rear, how much of is their total lot size, right?
So I wouldn't be against, like I said, since it is becoming more popular, doing some guidelines, whether it's only on the side or the rear, or guidelines on the type you have to use, the aesthetics of it, and then like some of it's permeable, some of it's not. Do we say they only have to use a permeable turf, or if it's impervious, it goes towards their impervious calculations versus their landscape calculations. So I think there's some simple things and maybe tweaks and guidelines we should put just to keep up with the times and make sure. Yeah, because some of the ones with the whole front yard, I'm like, that can't be 10%. That's got to be more, but maybe it is. I don't know. It's hard to get a gauge on that, and every house is different, of course. So
we can draft something if you like. So
I suspect in some of those cases they weren't aware that there was a limitation and maybe did not seek any type of permit or approval and just went ahead and installed.
Or they did it and then got it passed, and then the guy came back and mysteriously more turf showed up in the backyard. You couldn't do that in the front yard, obviously, but.
Well, I think there's different reasons too. Some people do it because they don't want the maintenance, but others I have a place in my backyard. No matter what I do, I cannot get grass to grow. Now I don't have artificial turf there. I'm not personally a fan. I, found another solution. But I know sometimes people do it because, they can't get grass to grow and they want that look. So, so I think completely eliminating it maybe is not the right thing to do, but definitely having some guidelines.
I agree.
Mayor,
So the
Yes.
guideline,
when
Go ahead.
it's appropriate.
Yeah, go ahead, Dee.
So, a couple things. Our current code does not actually say artificial turf. What it says is that landscaping is a combination of living plants and non-living landscape material, and then parenthetically, we list rocks, pebbles, sand, mulch, or pavers. So, people extrapolate from that, well, artificial turf is not a living landscape material, so I must be allowed to use that as well. And then we do limit, we do have the 10% of the landscaped area maximum for the non-living landscape material. But as has been discussed, there are no parameters as to where it can go. And as an aside, this is one case where I disagree with the Attorney General's opinion, although They are correct. There's no express mention of artificial turf in the statute. If you actually go to the Florida Friendly website that's created by the University of Florida, you will find the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program does not consider artificial turf to be a Florida Friendly product on their website. And they've got, if you want your property to be officially deemed a Florida Friendly property, they've got this whole checklist and all these criteria that you have to meet in order to, get your Florida Friendly seal of approval, silver or gold, whatever it is. But they do not recognize artificial turf as a certainly can't be predominantly part of the landscaping. If the council is interested in putting something on the books, I would recommend adopting something in terms of location. There's plenty of examples. You can't have it in the front yard. You can't have it where you can see it from the right of way. Some codes, the North Palm Beach Code is a great example. I mean, really get into regulating the quality of the turf, what it looks like, what it's made out of, how long it lasts, what the warranty is, what the subgrade has to be. I mean, there's really some extremely detailed codes, and then there are just some more basic codes as well. But quite honestly, right now, if I had to defend, and if we're interpreting our code to say this allows 10%, and just extreme example, I had a code enforcement case. They were found not in violation. An affected neighbor appealed that. It would be difficult to defend what we have on the code right now in terms of artificial turf, because quite frankly, it's an extrapolation from what our current code is. So if the council's interested in putting some reasonable regulations on this, I think it would be a good idea to beef up the code if that's what your interest is.
And can I just say that our Steve Parker, our landscape architect consultant, he did opine that our current code does permit 10% artificial turf. That was his professional opinion.
I understand that. And that's why I say, I mean, it's an extrapolation because we don't say artificial turf. We say, well, we say all these other things, so we must all obviously include artificial turf. All I'm saying is if you really want to say you can have that 10%, but you want to restrict where it can go and that sort of thing, we need more code.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other council comments?
I wouldn't be opposed to labeling it exactly to say artificial turf, so it's clear to residents.
I mean, I'd say if we're gonna make even that small change, we should consider some bigger changes while we're at it. But I don't disagree. I mean, I think it's such as rock, so I guess, to Keith's point, you can extrapolate from there. But if we're gonna allow it, let's just go ahead and say it, and then if we're gonna allow it, let's define it the way that we think residents and, we all think it should be installed and everything else.
The quality thereof.
I like the North Palm idea. I mean, whatever that, I'm gonna look that up.
I agree.
Would you like me to draft something to bring back to another workshop for discussion?
Yeah, let me take public comment first, and then we'll give you your action. Is there any public comment?
Patrick, I think, is in your backup, the North Palm.
Mrs. Watkins, Mr. Radford got up first. Okay.
So the EAC opined on this subject, and it's in your backup. And contrary to popular belief, I'm not incalcitrant relative to the subject of artificial turf. We looked closely at Winter Park and Palm Beach's codes. And what we ended up recommending to you was a mirror image of Palm Beach's code, which basically says you can only have it in the front yard if it's a driveway accent where you like to have the white concrete and the fake grass in between. And it can only be in the side yard or rear yard. And I think it says it cannot have lead in it or something like that. But Patrick and Keith hit the nail on the head. The problem with the existing code is that it's not mentioned in those non-living landscape section, and it needs to, I would even take it out and give it its own subsection so that everybody can clearly see it, that artificial turf is allowed at 10%, and hopefully, you would agree, only in the backyard. And then there's one other thing you have to consider that's been bugging me for a long time, is how did these people that have this stuff in their front yard get away with it? And so is it it's more than 10%, which is Molly was going to, because like it's the entire property, front, side, and rear. And so either we don't have proper code compliance, or what we need to do is take proactive steps to grandfather these people, at least for the life of the artificial turf that they have, so that they're not run out of town or put in jail, or just grandfather them. And I wouldn't let it be in perpetuity. I would grandfather them until such time as they need to remove or change that artificial turf, and at that time, they need to comply, just to protect them.
Thank you. Mrs. Watkins?
Just a thought at the time, know nothing about artificial turf. Do you have to specify color? I would hate to get in, even in our neighborhood, I've seen green, and then there's kind of a blue-green, and I don't want to get into pink, purple, orange, good Lord, if that needs to be specified. And one of the lessons I learned early on is if the code doesn't say you can't, a lot of people assume you can, and that may be what happened in some circumstances here. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think everyone's in favor of not completely eliminating it and just putting together some guidelines.
Yeah, I agree.
So do you need any more information on that, or
Would you like me to bring it back to a workshop regarding whether it's pervious, impervious, etc.?
Yeah, because I think there are considerations of that, and the types and locations and everything.
There's a lot of options. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, our last item, agenda item 3, update on the vulnerability assessment from Marjorie.
Hi, Marjorie Craig, Utilities Director, and you're going to be delighted to know that the update is really going to be done by our engineering intern. So this is the last week for Melanie, and this is one of her primary projects. She's going to do a little presentation kind of about what she did on her summer vacation, her summer working, and why she enjoyed the village of Tequesta so much, right? Yeah. So, but seriously, the vulnerability assessment is something that's going to be really critical to the village. Once we establish an adaptation plan and the adaptation projects, we will be able to apply for 50% matching grants for those adaptation projects. So with that, Melanie will do a presentation, and then if you have any questions, stand by.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. My name is Melanie Garrow, and I'm the Utilities Engineering Intern this summer. So I'm going to tell you a bit today about my responsibilities as an intern, and again, the vulnerability assessment, going a bit through that. So I wanted to start off by telling you all a bit about myself and how I got here to where I am today. So I'm from the area, I'm from Stuart, Florida. I went to South Fork High School and graduated from Indian River State College as a dual enrollment student. Now I'm at the University of Florida going into my last year studying environmental engineering sciences. And I've always really been interested in the environmental field, but my main interest really lies in solid waste. I've been able to kind of explore that through my coursework at the university. And outside of my classes, I like to participate in the Gator Marching Band. Those top 2 pictures are from our recent trip to Ireland. Then I also participate in the Sustainable Materials Management Research Lab, where I get to explore kind of that solid waste interest a bit more. And you can see those 2 pictures on the bottom left are me working there. And I also am in the Society for Hispanic Professional Engineers, where I tutor statics, one of our introductory engineering courses, and I participate in a lot of industry events. So kind of an overview of some of the responsibilities that I've had at the village. I really do believe that as an engineer, my responsibility lies in learning how I can apply my skills to give back to my community. And I think that through the village, by learning at the Village of Tequesta, I've really been able to kind of hone in on that goal of mine. And I've been able to also get a chance to look at different career paths, not kind of get a broad overview of the different options that I can take moving forward as I move towards graduation. So I've gotten a chance to look at some of the different utilities around here, some even pertaining to my interest in solid waste, like the Solid Waste Authority, Martin County Utilities and Solid Waste. I've also had a chance to shadow some of our consultants with Kimley Horn. I spent 2 days with them, kind of looking at what they do, their typical everyday life. And I've also been able to...
She referred to it as being a CAD monkey.
Yeah, that's really a big part of the design process. But I've also gotten a chance to work on my networking skills in events like the Florida Water Resources Conference and connect with industry professionals through that. So while I've been here, I've had a big list of guidelines to kind of keep me on track on my everyday, helping me set goals for my different projects and prioritize the different tasks that I need to do. Some of those projects being listed here, with the main one that I'm going to go in today being the vulnerability assessment. So the vulnerability assessment is easily one of the most important projects going on in the village right now. We're a coastal community. We have to look at going forward how we're going to be affected by things like increasing sea level rise, more frequent and more intense storms. So it's a FDEP funded project, and it allows us to get funding to gather different types of data, collect them all into one place, and see, okay, how kind of get a comprehensive overview of our flood risk in the village, taking into account all of these different data types. So our priority with this is to gather the highest quality data that we can, because that will serve as a foundation for funding future projects to support our resilience with stormwater, any sort of construction that we have to do there. So again, the priority is protecting our critical infrastructure, those threats being sea level rise and storms. Critical infrastructure meaning things like our water plant, our electric supply, any roadways, bridges, things like that, and any regionally or culturally significant structures, schools, libraries, parks, more things like that. An overview of the process of the vulnerability assessment, it starts with getting the FDEP grant approved. Then we move on to getting our data, which is where we are now. So we take all of these different types of data, the three big types being our inventory of our assets at the village. For example, our location for our water plant, that needs to be logged into our database. Then we take our elevation data. We're pretty flat here at the village, so that's not something that would take us too long. Then we look at different flood scenarios. For example, comparing your average daily summer storm to a hurricane and seeing how those different scenarios would impact the flooding on the village. Here I was able to make a contribution by identifying some of our data gaps. We were missing some schools, we were missing our railway and our library. We were also pulling from one of the incorrect data sources for one of our maps, which I'll show you all later. And we have a lot of this data kind of spread across different consultants. So one of the things I was able to do is kind of make sure that they're communicating with each other and communicating with us so that all that data is in one place. It's not kind of spread out everywhere. After that's done, we will draft our vulnerability assessment, which includes an exposure analysis, seeing what will be exposed to flooding, and a sensitivity analysis, seeing out of that area that is exposed to flooding, what will be more susceptible to damage. For example, if you have two houses, one on a raised foundation and one just at ground level, the one that's at a raised foundation is going to be less sensitive to that flooding going forward. So kind of seeing what is our priority, what do we need to protect now? Then we'll do our final vulnerability assessment. That'll kind of consolidate all of that information, because it is a lot of data to go with, and make it into something that's easier for us to look at. Lots of figures, lots of summaries, things like that. Then we'll do our parallel flood compliance, looking at different solutions to our flood risk. and we will develop an adaptation plan and implement different construction projects to protect ourselves from the future flooding. So now we're going to touch on some of the progress that we've made so far. Like I said, we're working on data acquisition right now, and we just finished our coastal analysis, which has 3 different types of scenarios to look at. One of them being the 100-year storm, which is our 1% chance of happening every year. And that coincides with, on the bottom, that flood map that we have is our current flood map. That coincides with all of the red spots that would be subject to flooding during that 100-year storm. It also includes the mean high water depth, which is just daily ebbs and flows of tides, and the still water elevation depth, which will be the overall sea level rise. And here I was able to make a contribution by making sure that our current model map, which is above, coincides with the current model, with the current flood map that we have at the village, which is below. So you can kind of imagine the red on the bottom map coincides with the blue on the top map. So all of that in blue is more susceptible to dangerous levels of flooding. So here's where things can get a bit intimidating, because going forward, looking just even 20 years into the future, this is what that same flood map would look like. So you can see just the significant increase in flooding to our residents. And if you go even further to 2070, that's what our map would look like. So it can be very intimidating to look at, a bit scary to look at. But what's important to know is that we are focused on taking action now before those scenarios happen, because we want to prevent that from happening. Our next steps for the vulnerability assessment include continuing to identify data gaps. The Department of Environmental Protection can fund more data collection to give us more comprehensive data to work with. And we will continue, our consultants right now are working on inland modeling, seeing how soil absorbance will contribute to reduction in flooding. And then we will do our adaptation plan. So I have listed some options that are often seen in adaptation plans. A lot of these aren't as applicable to us at the village. We're pretty developed, we're suburban, so we have a lot of single family units going on. We aren't going to tell someone to move off their property for the sake of preserving a floodplain. So what we can do here, I have in bold, those are mostly construction-based projects, things like dune restorations, ecosystem restoration, sand scraping, and constructed flood measures like those flood walls. And going forward, this is our schedule for the vulnerability assessment. So the final product is expected to be completed around March of next year. So for the future of the vulnerability assessment, again, it's really critical for us to have this data now so that we can fund those projects in the future. We need to have a strong baseline so that we have evidence to show the government that we do need that support from them to strengthen our village. And what we can also do is compare our vulnerability assessment with those of our surrounding communities and see we will probably have a lot of similar concerns, and we can collaborate on those solutions together instead of kind of trying to reinvent the wheel on our own. And I want to address one of the main concerns that has come up when doing this vulnerability assessment. We all know global warming is caused by carbon emissions, which then causes sea level rise. Why are we not tackling the problem at its source with carbon emissions? Shouldn't that be our focus? But the reality is, as a small community, we can only do so much when it comes to carbon emissions. Even if we did the best possible job we could with carbon emissions, completely like reduce, if we became a carbon sink tomorrow, it would still not be enough to completely eliminate these scenarios from happening. So our priority needs to be making sure that our residents are safe. You know, we, as engineers, we say, plan for the worst, hope for the best. So here, by doing this assessment, we're really making sure that we prioritize safety and have a plan going forward. Now, I really do want to encourage our residents to be a part of this process. We want to make sure that they know what's going on and be transparent. So we do have a public outreach meeting coming up in mid-August that I would encourage all of you to attend. And because this really is crucial to the future of Tequesta. Thank you for your time. I will gladly take any questions.
Thank you, Melanie. Council?
Well done.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for your work this summer.
Yep.
Best of luck to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Go Gators. Go on. What is sand scraping dredging? Is that what it, okay.
Yes.
And this might be a tough question to answer because there's probably quite a few things we need to tackle. But if you had to identify one, like our biggest vulnerability right now, that if we were to focus on one thing, what would you say, based on what you've seen and done this summer? What do you think that would be?
Really the biggest vulnerability, since again, we're a suburban community, we have a lot of single-family homes here. The biggest vulnerability would be to our residents, like in those maps that we saw earlier. Let's see if I can pull that up again.
And I guess with that, how the vulnerability meaning, if there was one single step we could take today to really put us in the best position in 2070, which is terrifying to look at, what is the biggest issue you think we have that could lead us to that, or that we don't have, rather?
Shoreline erosion.
Yeah.
It's really crucial to make sure that our shores are strengthened because, you know, if we don't take the action now to make sure that they can stand up to the future, then we really can't do much.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Vice Mayor, any comments, questions?
No questions, Mayor, thank you.
My only comment is I know you guys are aware we workshopped potentially adding some requirements for living shoreline to our code. Is that something we should hold on until we get this assessment? Because it sounds like they are addressing, you know, the coastal resiliency, or do you suggest we proceed with that? This won't really focus specifically on any living shoreline solutions.
I think that if you, Marjorie Craig, Utilities Director, I think go ahead and continue what you're doing with it, living shoreline, and we'll integrate what there is when we get the final report from the consultant. I also think that whatever we can do to work together with our regional partners for any type of structures or projects to help mitigate some of the impacts or potential impacts would be a good thing. I know we're small, but we're mighty, so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Melanie, I'm sure you had many summer internship opportunities, so truly thank you for coming and spending your summer here with us. You did a great job, and you definitely have a bright future ahead of yourself. Thank you.
It's been great to be here.
And she really did add value by finding a bust in some of the data.
That's great.
So
Yes.
she was well worth what she made.
Thank you.
Any public comment? Mr. Bradford?
First of all, Melanie, thank you for your service, and we hope it was beneficial to you as it was for us. I think the presentation was excellent, but there was one thing at the tail end that disturbed me, and that is it implied that we should put off any attempts to reduce carbon emissions until such time as the vulnerability assessment recommendations are implemented and or take place. We have to continue to do our part to reduce carbon emissions, even though if we, as she said, Melanie said, if we reduced 100%, we would still have a problem, but we have to do our share as well, such as through the planting of trees and the myriad of other things that you can do, like electric vehicles, et cetera, solar power. You just have to do our part, and that way we can look at the governor and the legislature and our neighboring communities and say, we've done our part. Jeremy has tasked the EAC for doing our part in an affordable manner, and we continue to work on that as I speak. And so I just wanted to state that so that you are all aware of.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford.
Marjorie Craig. apologize, I don't think, that's not what she meant. I didn't think, she did not mean we should stop or abandon any of our efforts, because it's all worthwhile to do whatever we can, I agree.
It's just not the fix for.
Yeah, that she
Yeah.
just, it was quantifying things, you know, we're engineers, so. Thank you.
Okay, all right, and with that, we will adjourn the meeting.
Thank you. I wonder if my salad's still back there.
Yeah, it is.